150,000 to 180,000 Russian troops may be relying on a logistics network that Ukraine is trying to pressure every single day. At the center of that network stands the Kerch Bridge, the most important connection between mainland Russia and the Crimean Peninsula. On the surface, everything still appears to be working. Trains continue to cross the bridge. Military vehicles keep moving. Fuel, ammunition, equipment, and reinforcements are still flowing toward the southern front. But modern warfare is not always decided by massive explosions or bridges collapsing in front of cameras. Sometimes the greatest danger comes when a critical supply route remains intact, but is forced to operate under constant pressure. Every air raid alert, every drone sighting, every convoy that must change its route. All of these can increase costs, slow movement, and place additional strain on the logistics system behind the battlefield. Meanwhile, Ukraine is expanding its efforts against the supply links that connect Crimea with the Kherson and Zaporizhia fronts. And that is raising a series of important questions. If the Kerch Bridge is truly protected by one of the strongest air defense networks Russia has deployed in Crimea, why does this target continue to appear in military discussions? Is Russia controlling the situation better than many people think? Or are there still weaknesses that existing defenses cannot fully solve? Join Military Force as we take a closer look. The Kerch Bridge remains one of Ukraine's hardest targets because Russia has built a dense defense zone around it. This is not a road link. It is a political symbol, a military artery, and the most direct connection between mainland Russia and occupied Crimea. For Moscow, protecting it is not optional. Ukrainian military expert Roman Svitin argues that Russia maintains strong air defenses around the bridge. That matters because many Ukrainian attacks have used drones and cruise missiles, and these weapons must pass through several layers before reaching the crossing. Radar sites can detect objects. Electronic warfare can interfere with guidance. Short-range and longer-range systems can try to intercept the threat before it reaches the final approach. This does not make the bridge impossible to hit. It means the cost of reaching it is high. A drone moving toward Kerch may be tracked before it gets close. A cruise missile may face jamming and interceptors during the most dangerous part of its flight. Even when an attack fails or only partly succeeds, Russia can still learn from it. Each raid shows where the threat came from, how the warning system reacted, and which part of the defense needs reinforcement. Russia defends the Kerch Bridge so heavily because the bridge carries more than traffic. It carries the message that Crimea is physically tied to Russia. It also supports the movement of military cargo, vehicles, personnel, fuel, and equipment into the peninsula. If the bridge were badly damaged, Moscow would face a military problem and a political shock. That is why the area remains one of Russia's defensive priorities in the Black Sea region. Since the start of the full-scale war, Russia has had time to study Ukrainian attacks against Crimea. Every alarm has tested its response. Every strike has forced adjustments in radar coverage, air defense placement, patrol routes, and electronic protection. The more valuable the target is, the more resources Russia is willing to place around it. This helps explain why drone strikes alone may struggle to create a decisive result. Ukraine can pressure the bridge, force Russia to keep valuable systems near Kerch, and test the strength of the defensive network. But breaking through such a protected target with common attack methods is much harder than hitting a fuel depot, road junction, or storage site that has fewer layers of protection. And that possibility is becoming part of the debate today. However, Svitin's argument does not stop with the weapons Ukraine uses most often today. It leads to a more serious question. What happens if Ukraine receives strike systems that the defenses around Crimea were never built to stop? The weakness Roman Svitin points to is not about Russia failing against every type of attack. It is specific, technical, and important for the next stage of the war. Around the Kerch Bridge, Russian forces may still stop drones and cruise missiles, But ballistic missiles create a different problem. They challenge a defense network mainly prepared for air targets on predictable routes. Crimea is not protected in the same way as Moscow. The Russian capital has long been covered by strategic missile defense systems, including the A-135 network, designed for a higher threat level. That system was not built to guard every occupied area, bridge, port, or supply hub. It was built to defend the center of Russian power. According to Svitin's argument, the Kerch area does not have that shield, a gap Ukraine may exploit if it gains the right weapons. The difference comes down to time, speed, and trajectory. A drone can fly low and be difficult to detect, but it usually moves slowly compared with a missile. A cruise missile can be dangerous because it flies faster and can use terrain to hide from radar, but it still follows a powered flight path that air defense crews track. A ballistic missile works differently. After launch, it rises high, then descends toward the target at great speed. That final stage makes the threat serious. Defenders may have only a short window to detect the weapon, calculate its path, decide on a response, and launch an interceptor. Air defense is not only about having missiles ready, it is about seeing the threat early enough and acting before impact. If any part of that chain is delayed, the defense becomes weaker. Seconds can matter when the weapon is falling fast from above. This is why fixed targets become especially exposed when ballistic weapons enter the picture. A bridge cannot move. A port cannot hide. A large logistics hub cannot suddenly change position when warning sirens begin. These targets can be hardened, repaired, protected by smoke, or surrounded by air defense, but their location is already known. Once an attacker has accurate coordinates and a weapon able to reach the area, the defender must stop the strike in the air. For the Kerch Bridge, this changes the logic of the contest. Russia can place more radar near the strait. It can move additional short-range systems into the area. It can increase patrols and keep repair crews ready. These steps can reduce risk, but they do not fully solve the ballistic problem if the defensive architecture was not designed for that mission. A network built to defeat drones and cruise missiles may struggle against weapons that arrive faster, higher, and with less warning. That challenge grows even larger when several threats approach at different times and from different directions during combat. This does not mean Ukraine can easily strike the bridge tomorrow. It means the balance around Kerch may depend on what Ukraine receives, not only on what it has used in the past. If Kyiv gains weapons with ballistic or near-ballistic flight profiles, pressure on Russian planners would rise. They would have to protect the bridge not only from low-flying threats, but also from attacks that compress decision time and stress the command chain. That is why Svitin's warning matters. It shifts the discussion away from whether drones alone can break through the defenses around Kerch. The more important issue is whether Ukraine can introduce strike systems that force Russia to defend the same target under different rules. But even if a new type of weapon creates danger for Kerch, it still does not answer the central question. Does Ukraine want to bring the bridge down? Or is the larger target the military traffic moving across it every day? Ukraine does not need to destroy the Kerch Bridge to create a serious military effect. In this stage of the war, the deeper objective may be to interrupt the movement that gives the bridge its value. Troops, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, vehicles, and repair equipment matter only if they arrive where Russia needs them, when Russia needs them. A bridge can remain standing and still become less useful. If traffic has to slow down after every warning, the military result begins before any visible collapse. If trains must be checked more carefully, if convoys must wait for safer hours, or if cargo has to be separated into smaller movements, the supply line is already losing speed. On a battlefield where artillery, drones, and vehicles consume resources every day, time becomes part of the weapon. This is why pressure on Kerch should not be measured only by whether the structure is destroyed. The key measure is whether Russia can use it with the same rhythm and volume as before. A bridge under constant threat forces commanders to plan around risk. They must decide when to move cargo, how much to send at once, which units need priority, and what air defense assets must remain nearby instead of moving elsewhere. Continuous alerts create operational friction. A single air raid warning may only delay movement for a short time, but repeated alerts can build into a larger problem. Crews become slower. Schedules change. Civilian and military traffic may need separation. Security checks take longer. Repair teams must stay ready, even when no strike lands. The bridge may still function, but it functions under pressure, and that pressure has a cost. Russia can respond by adding more protection around the crossing, but protection is not free. More radar coverage requires more crews. More air defense batteries require missiles, maintenance, fuel, and trained personnel. More patrols require vehicles and manpower. Every additional layer used to guard Kerch is a resource that cannot be used somewhere else with the same ease. In that sense, Ukraine can gain value simply by forcing Russia to keep expensive systems tied to one fixed area. Crimea makes this pressure more important. The peninsula is not only a political prize for Moscow, it is also a major support area for the southern front. Supplies moving through or into Crimea can support operations toward Kherson and Zaporizhia. Fuel can keep vehicles moving. Ammunition can support artillery. Spare parts can return damaged equipment to service. Even small delays in these flows can spread outward across many units. This approach fits a wider pattern in modern warfare. An army can be weakened not only by destroying its tanks at the front, but also by reducing the flow that keeps those tanks active. A vehicle without fuel becomes a burden. A gun without shells becomes silent. A unit waiting for replacement parts loses options. The fight behind the line can decide what is possible on the line. For Ukraine, the Kerch Bridge is therefore not only a target to break, it is a target to burden, watch, disrupt, and make harder for Russia to use. The goal is not always one decisive explosion. It can also be a steady campaign that turns a vital route into a route filled with delays, caution, and rising costs across the southern battlefield. And to understand why slowing this supply flow matters so much, the next question is simple. How many Russian forces are depending on the southern logistics system to keep operating every day? A force of 150,000 to 180,000 Russian troops turns logistics into a battlefield of its own. The number mentioned in the transcript is not only a measure of manpower. It is a measure of daily demand. Every soldier, vehicle, gun, radar unit, medical team, repair crew, and command post need supplies to remain useful in Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. This is one of the largest Russian groupings tied to the southern theater. Its size gives Moscow weight on the battlefield, but it also creates a heavy support burden. Large formations can hold ground, rotate units, and prepare attacks, but they consume fuel, ammunition, food, water, batteries, spare parts, communications gear, and medical supplies every day. The larger the force becomes, the more pressure falls on the routes that feed it. This means the southern force is not only a combat formation, it is also a daily transportation problem. Trucks, trains, storage sites, repair points, and fuel depots must work together without long interruptions, because a large army can lose strength even before it loses ground on the map. The pressure does not disappear when the front becomes quieter. Even during reduced fighting, units still need deliveries. Vehicles break down. Engines need maintenance. Artillery barrels wear out. Drones need batteries and parts. Field hospitals need medicine. Troops need food and water. Defensive positions require tools, concrete, timber, generators, and cables. War consumes supplies, even when maps do not change. This is why a delay in logistics can matter long before it creates a collapse. A shipment that arrives one day late may seem small by itself, but if fuel, shells, parts, and replacement troops are delayed again and again, the effect builds. Commanders may ration ammunition. Vehicle movements may be limited. Damaged equipment may wait longer for repair. Units preparing for a push may postpone movement because the support behind them is not ready. For a force spread across Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, distance matters. Supplies do not simply appear near the front. They must be loaded, moved, checked, unloaded, stored, protected, and moved again. Each step creates another point where time can be lost. If one major route is pressured, the effect can move through warehouses, staging areas, vehicle parks, and forward positions. That makes logistics an attractive target for Ukraine. A strike on a combat unit may remove one immediate threat. A strike on the supply chain can reduce the ability of many units to fight with the same speed and intensity. Fuel sites, repair areas, transport hubs, bridges, and convoy routes are not background targets. They are the system that allows frontline units to operate. The southern grouping also forces Russia to make choices. Which sector receives fuel first? Which artillery unit gets shells? Which vehicles are repaired quickly? Which troops can be rotated, and which must remain in place longer? These decisions become harder when the supply network is under pressure. This explains why Ukraine increasingly looks behind the front line. The goal is not only to hit soldiers in trenches, it is also to weaken the system that keeps those soldiers armed, supplied, and mobile. However, Russia does not rely on the Kerch Bridge alone. Moscow has built alternative routes to keep supplies moving if one link is seriously threatened. The land corridor through Rostov, Mariupol, and Melitopol has become Russia's main insurance policy against pressure on the Kerch Bridge. Moscow has spent years building and using this route along the Sea of Azov because it gives Russia another way to move supplies into the southern theater. If traffic through Crimea slows, this corridor can help keep fuel, ammunition, vehicles, spare parts, and personnel moving toward Russian positions. That makes the route important, but it does not make it safe. A replacement supply line can reduce dependence on one bridge, yet it also creates new targets across a wider map. The road from Rostov toward Mariupol and Melitopol crosses transport points, staging areas, fuel stops, repair sites, rail links, and junctions. Each point helps the system work, and each point can also become a target if Ukraine can detect it. The problem with a longer route is exposure. More distance means more time on the road. A convoy may try to move at night, but it still needs roads, drivers, fuel, and places to stop. A train may carry more cargo than trucks, but rail lines depend on stations, switches, bridges, and loading areas. Even a small delay can spread across the route. One late convoy can affect unloading times, storage space, refueling schedules, and the next movement order, especially when many units are waiting for the same flow of supplies. This is where Ukraine's expanding drone campaign matters. Medium and long-range UAVs allow Kyiv to look beyond the immediate front line and pressure areas that Russian planners once treated as safer rear zones. These attacks do not need to hit every truck on the road. They can focus on the nodes that make movement possible. A fuel depot lost at the wrong moment can slow several convoys. A damaged rail point can force cargo onto roads. A strike near a bridge can make commanders reroute traffic through a less efficient path. For Russia, this creates a difficult defensive problem. Protecting the Kerch Bridge is already costly, but protecting a long land corridor requires even more resources. Air defense systems cannot be everywhere at once. Radar coverage has limits. Electronic warfare units need crews and power. Patrols require vehicles and manpower. If Moscow spreads protection across too many locations, each site may become less secure. If it protects only the most important nodes, smaller points remain exposed. That is the weakness of alternative routes. They keep supplies moving, but they also stretch the defensive burden. Russia must guard roads, rail lines, depots, bridges, repair yards, and convoy routes over a much larger area. Ukraine does not need to shut down the entire corridor at once. It only needs to keep adding risk to enough places to make movement slower, more cautious, and more expensive. And when both the Kerch Bridge and the alternative routes operate under growing pressure, Ukraine's target is no longer one structure. It becomes the operating rhythm of Russia's entire southern logistics system. The final objective is not to stop every Russian truck in a day. It is to reduce the operating tempo of the system that keeps Russia's southern war effort moving. Roman Sviton's estimate that a 30% reduction in logistics flow could create effects over time is important because modern armies do not fail only when bridges fall. They also weaken when supplies arrive late, movement becomes slower, and commanders lose flexibility. A 30% reduction may not sound like a shutdown, but in military terms it can change planning. If fewer fuel shipments arrive, vehicles cannot move as freely. If fewer ammunition loads reach storage points, artillery units must fire with more restraint. If repair parts come late, damaged trucks, armored vehicles, and radar systems stay out of service longer. The result is not always a dramatic collapse. It can be a steady loss of speed across the whole force. Ukraine's method appears to focus on that kind of pressure. Roads, bridges, fuel depots, convoy routes, and logistics nodes all become part of the same campaign. Each strike may look limited on its own, but the combined effect can force Russia to spend more time moving, guarding, repairing, and rerouting. In a long war, those extra hours and extra resources matter. This is why modern warfare is not measured only by the number of targets destroyed. It is also measured by whether an army can keep its rhythm. Can it move fuel on schedule? Can it replace losses quickly? Can it repair equipment fast enough? Can it support attacks while also holding defensive lines? If the answer becomes less certain, the battlefield changes even before territorial movement appears. The pressure can also reach Crimea beyond the military sphere. A logistics system that carries military supplies often overlaps with civilian transport, fuel distribution, repair capacity, and local economic activity. If military protection increases and transport becomes less predictable, civilian life can also feel the strain. That does not mean Crimea becomes isolated overnight. It means the cost of keeping the peninsula connected may rise. This brings the struggle around Kerch back to its core meaning. It is not only about one bridge, one missile type, or one explosion. It is about who can control the pace of a wider campaign. Ukraine is trying to reduce Russia's ability to sustain war longer across the southern theater, not just damage isolated targets. The fight around the Kerch Bridge is no longer only about whether one structure can survive the next strike. It is about whether Russia can keep its southern war machine supplied under growing pressure. The bridge remains one of Ukraine's most important strategic targets, and Russia still protects it with serious defensive power. But the larger contest is moving beyond the bridge itself. If Ukraine gains weapons that can challenge Russian defenses in new ways, Kerch may face a different level of risk. At the same time, Kyiv is expanding pressure across roads, depots, convoy routes, rail links, and alternative corridors that connect Russia, Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. The key question is not simply whether the bridge will fall. The deeper question is whether Russia can keep moving enough fuel, ammunition, equipment, and troops to sustain its campaign in southern Ukraine for the long term. Military force, our goal is not to celebrate war, but to understand it. Every bridge, missile, convoy, and battlefield decision reminds us how much depends on logistics, strategy, and human lives during a conflict. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to Military Force, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with others who want to better understand today's changing battlefield. Thank you for watching, and remember, the more we learn about war, the more we can appreciate the value of peace.